Hey, welcome back everybody. All right, so I've got a Mini Cooper S 2009 that I bought for very cheap. I think it had a timing chain noise or timing chain issue, but it started and it kind of ran. In fact, I drove it the other night. When I first brought it home, I got the battery situation sorted out because the battery was dead. So I took this Walmart battery that was in here that was dead, and I swapped it out, got a brand new battery for $8. I had to pay taxes on it. So brought the battery home, plugged it in, car started it up. It took a couple minutes to like crank it over and get the gas flowing and everything. Was making the valve train noise that I knew of when I bought the car. It's in pretty good shape all the way around. Little ding or scratch. But all in all, it's a pretty good car. It's a pretty good quality car. Everything inside functions. It's got pretty new snow tires on it. The brakes and everything were fairly new before it sat for 6 months, so they're kind of rusted a little bit. But all in all, the car's good shape. I did a compression test on the cylinders as I was doing my diagnosis, and I also pulled the valve cover off. By the way, the compression test, all 4 cylinders were within acceptable tolerances. Except number 4, I believe, the one that's farthest from the timing chain, it had about 15% lower compression than the first 3. So the first 3 were like 150 or 148, and this one was like 128 or something like 125. The seller who I bought it from said that he had changed the timing chain on his own about 10,000 miles ago. And over the winter, they were driving it, and it lost power, engine light came on, they limped it back home, and it sat ever since. It was not running smooth. It was a very rough idle. Like the timing was off, basically. That's kind of what it sounded like to me. So I pulled the valve cover off, checked the timing belt or the timing chain, and the guides were all intact. There was no evidence of it being broken. The valve train looked fine, a little tarnished, but it's got 134,000 miles on the engine. So I put the valve cover back on. One thing I did notice in the inspection was that there was no oil in the engine. It was literally empty. So I topped it off with some cheap oil just to kind of do like a flush, put new spark plugs in it, and I was still having idling issues even though the noise was there, and I kind of assumed that the noise was happening from just the loud lifters from being without oil. There were codes that were being thrown on the computer that led me to go and buy a new O2 sensor. Like, for example, I had no data on number 1, the upstream O2 sensor. So I went in and I bought a new one, plugged it in, and cleared the codes. And it started to run a little bit better. The noise was still there. It seemed to idle. At least, it was a little rough, but it was idling. And I just felt like I needed to clear the cobwebs. I did a seafoam treatment. So I was kind of excited that it was running, even with noise. And no engine light came on right away. So I kind of let it run in the driveway for a little while. And then I took it around the block and it was fine, no engine light. It seemed to run okay. So I came back home and I grabbed my son and we both got in the car and we decided to go for about a little longer test drive. A few minutes, maybe 5-6 minutes into the drive, engine light comes on, which I kind of expected because it was running rough, and I still suspected some of the other sensors and solenoids or whatever. And so then kept driving. I got kind of turned around in the neighborhood and I made a wrong turn. So as I was driving down that way, I heard like I swear to God, I heard like a little clink, but I thought it was almost like I ran over something or hit something in the road. It wasn't that big of a sound or anything. And then like a minute or two later, the engine stalled and shut off. And I was like, okay. So I checked the codes, and sure enough, I was getting a misfire in cylinder 3, a couple of other sensor codes, and I was like, all right. And we parked it. I thought that it had stalled because of the sea foam that I had in the engine, in the gas. So we tried, to start it a few times, and it wasn't going to have it. It wasn't starting at all. We ran it down, and the battery finally got to a point where we couldn't even crank it over anymore. So we towed it home and put it in the driveway. And the next morning, or actually no, that night before I even got home, I was gonna pull the plugs to see if I can clear out the cylinders and clear out the plugs and just kind of defoul them. Pulled number one. It was, it was black and had some, fuel on it, whatever. So I kind of set it aside, pulled out cylinder number 3, and that was the one that was getting the misfire code. And the spark plug was, let's say, damaged, which is really bizarre because there's no way the cylinder can come into contact with the spark plug. Yeah, so at that point I just stopped what I was doing, and I knew that there was not going to be a chance to even get it running that night, so we towed it home. And the next day I went to AutoZone and I picked up a bore scope and came home, looked into all the cylinders, and 1, 2, and 4 looked dirty, but no damage. It looked fairly okay. Number 3 looked like this, and if I can, I'll put a picture of the video here. It did not look good. There looked like obvious damage, and I sent it around to a few people in forums and a couple people I've been chatting with about the car. And so here I am. So I have this car, and I didn't pay a lot of money for the car. Paid $1,200 for the car in working condition with an engine that's running and working. And this car, the condition it's in, would easily sell for north of $5,000, maybe closer to $6,000, depending on how many miles are on the car, how clean it is. So if I clean this all up, get the engine running, I think I could sell this car for, at least $5,000. I'm trying to keep my costs to repair this car under $2,000. So I feel like, going through the parts list, adding them all up, even just all of the rebuild kit pieces, the gaskets, the seals, the bolts, all of that stuff that I need to do to rebuild this engine, let alone a new piston, new valves. I'm not sure what's broken in cylinder 3, and on top of that, the engine was not running right. Now, my theory around why it is not running right is, this is a theory, I think that the previous seller's timing job failed. And I think what happened was the crank bolt did not get, either it was reused because it's this one-time use torque bolt and they reused it, or when you put the new bolt in, just didn't get it torqued properly. So if you don't get that right, there's a high chance that sprocket slips and the chain gets out of time around the camshafts. A couple of degrees off on timing, and that's enough to send the pistons into the valves. And if the piston went into the valve and the valve broke, and that in hindsight, that's probably the lifter noise that I heard, or the valve train noise that I was hearing, wasn't the timing chain being broken, wasn't necessarily loud lifters. What it probably was the cylinders just kissing the valves, right? And so when I drove it with that noise, I probably gave it a little bit too many RPMs, and it cracked one of the valves, is my theory. And then a piece of that valve fell down into the cylinder, got spun around in there, smashed up and hit the spark plug, and killed that cylinder. So I think that's the theory. Now, so in order to repair this engine, depending on how much damage was done to cylinder 3 and if there's damage in the other cylinders, I'm going to have to get to a point where I can take the head off this engine and inspect it. So I'm deciding right now whether I want to just go full bore, take the front end of this car off, and yank the engine out completely so that I can take the head off and inspect it, and with the probability the valve train and the pistons are going to need to be replaced. Or so. And I noticed there's some oil leaking around the side of the engine. I'm not sure where that's coming from. If I get the engine completely out of the car, it'll give me an opportunity to inspect it, to see how much damage is done, to refresh the seals and the gaskets, inspect everything around it, maybe do a little cleanup on the outside of the engine, do a little paint job, and make this engine look and feel presentable. Make the engine bay look and feel presentable. Again, if I'm trying to sell this car for profit, this car needs to look the part, right? It needs to look like somebody took care of it, and it's great. And it has been taken care of, but it's a bit dirty. Some of the bolts are rusted and corroded. Some of the bolts are missing here and there. I still need to polish up the headlights. I need to do all the cleaning around the car, the body and the interior, just kind of get it all polished up. But my focus right now is get this car running. So I think it makes sense to go ahead and just try to get to a point where I can pull this engine out of the car and put it on an engine stand and start rebuilding it. The other thing is this car has got like no room to work around it. So it's just peace of mind, like pulling all of this out and being able to work in a free engine zone where I can get all the way around it 360 degrees. But this is the first time I've ever worked on a Mini. This is the first time I will have ever pulled apart an engine to that level. I feel confident that I can do it. But yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, it's low risk at this point unless I start buying a bunch of parts. And so that's my thoughts. I'll keep you posted here. I'm going to be trying to do a time lapse or maybe film little pieces and parts as I'm taking stuff apart here. But I'll keep you posted as we make progress.